Hello there. Welcome back. Today, we're really beginning our journey. You want to know why? Because today, here in Points of Light Radio, I will be interviewing my very first ever guest. His name is Alex Powers. Mr. Powers is a member of the Freemasons and a past master of his lodge in Kansas. He's also director of the Kansas Masonic Research Lodge. He has his own podcast called Historical Light Masonic Podcast. And I love featuring fellow podcasters and bloggers here on Points of Light Radio. But I'm doubly excited because Mr. Powers is quite knowledgeable in the history, not just of the Masonic Lodge, but also fraternalism in general within the United States. And that's the reason I've called him here today. And I'm now, as I've often said, we're not always fully aware of the history of these organizations. And I've often said this, a lot of Canadians and people all over the world are aware that George Washington was a Freemason and all the signatories of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence in the United States were Freemasons, but we forget our own history. We forget the history of these other organizations. Prime example here in Canada, Prime Minister John A. Macdonald, our very first Prime Minister, was a Freemason, an Orangeman, and an Oddfellow. No, we're not. We forget. Why do we forget things like that? Well, maybe we'll hash that out here in the coming minutes. But, well, brothers and sisters, it's time. Time to start our journey together. Are you ready? Then trim your lamp and follow me.
Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Mr. Powers.
Good evening. How are you?
Welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Glad to be here. Appreciate it.
Understand you had a little bit of a storm down there in Kansas. Got to be careful. Dorothy went through a storm. She wasn't in Kansas when she came out of that. Remember that.
Very true.
Well, as I said, welcome to Points of Light Radio. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I understand you're a Freemason and quite involved in Freemasonry.
My name's Alex Powers. I am a Freemason here in Kansas, host of Historical Light Masonic Podcast, and past master of Gardner Masonic Lodge, currently serving as director of the Kansas Lodge Research under the Grand Lodge of Kansas.
Well, now, as I understand it, now you say you're a Freemason, and I raised some questions about Freemasonry in one of my last segments here. Like, a lot of people know about the contributions that the Masons made to, for instance, the signatories of the Constitution and a lot of the documents that were signed down there in the founding fathers of the United States being Freemasons. But why is it, like, why do people know so much about that? But the fact that many of the people who were signatories to these documents were also members of different lodges, such as the Pythians or the Elks or things like that. Why do you think that is?
Well, in that time period, fraternalism was at an all-time high, and it was very popular to be a part of many different groups for many different reasons. One thing to understand is other fraternities outside of Freemasonry, while they have that fraternalism aspect, all served very different purposes. For example, Oh, Oddfellows, IOF, is a common one that you'll find both Freemasons and others intermingling between the two. And that one was more of a beneficial society. It was kind of a life insurance, I guess you will, of that
Uh,
particular time. So you pay in with your dues, and you partake in it. And if anything would happen to you, as far as losing your job or becoming injured, you would have the potential to make a draw out and get a payment back from them and assistance in that manner. In this time period as well, it was still very impacted by the era of enlightenment. So that thinking was very popular to try to expand one's mind and improve oneself through the pursuit of knowledge, which is the main course of Freemasonry. So kind of in that time period, guys would reach out and get their hands on about anything they could, and you'd see guys involved in many different fraternal organizations outside of Freemasonry as well.
well, I understand, like Justice Rothbone was the one who started the Knights of Pythias. A lot of them were starting their own fraternal organizations as well at around that time. But I think you'd agree with me that when people were looking for friendship or fellowship in those days, they went to their family, their lodge, or their church. And as I've said before, with the advent of the welfare state or other forms of entertainment, like a Masonic lodge was a place where people might go to play cards on a night of the week, or for a raffle or something like that. And I think you'll agree with me that these organizations, for better or for worse, have kind of faded out a little bit with other forms of entertainment in the welfare state. Would you not agree?
Oh, I would totally agree. And especially in those early on time periods, life moved a lot slower. We weren't as connected as we are today. I couldn't have this conversation I'm having with you now. So by being a part of Freemasonry, Pythians, and other organizations, when these gentlemen would travel for work or pleasure or whatever, it was very helpful to have someone you knew and could have that instant bond with anywhere you go. That's still a benefit of Freemasonry today, but you can imagine in that time period, if you were to embrace a new town that you'd never been to before, especially being a member of multiple of those societies, it's almost guaranteed you're going to have a leg up and a friendly hand to be there and greet you and give you a hand if you need to in any aspects. As far as membership waning down, yeah, definitely. That's something we're dealing with in Freemasonry and pretty much every membership society. As the world has kind of become what it is today, people aren't quite joiners the way they were. Uh, Particularly speaking in the frame of Freemasonry, we saw a huge influx in membership around the time of the baby boomers. And they were a generation of joiners. However, their children were not so much. So we see this generational gap in membership. Next generation comes in and they're kind of joiners again. They're wanting to get back to these ancient secrets and understand what these orders are about. But we see that huge drop off in membership. And while we're climbing back with current interest today, you went from such an influx to kind of a normal influx now, and you've got that huge gap in the middle. And Freemasonry being one of the larger fraternal organizations out there, we're definitely feeling the impact of that, but that has impacted other organizations tenfold more than us. And Oddfellows, for example, we talked about earlier. While they still thrive in certain areas like California and Kansas, they're pretty much non-existent. Same with Pythians. Pythians were pretty much non-existent, but because of now that gaining interest back in those areas, we're starting to see people charter lodges and try to bring those aspects of life back to life, for lack of a better term.
And it can be done. I've actually saw it done with other lodges. But do you find also that everything, shall we say, upline from your craft lodges or your blue lodges, as you call them in the States, do you find that everything up lodge is also upstream from the lodge, shall we say, has been affected? For instance, like the Shrine, the Scottish Rite, things like that are also being affected by this slowdown in membership?
Oh yeah, definitely. So kind of one thing to understand about that is Shrine is what you would call an independent body, while Scottish
Yeah.
Rite and York Rite are rites. They actually continue on the degree system of which we teach in the Craft Lodge. You mentioned here in the U.S. we mainly have blue lodges. There is also a Red Lodge that would teach the first 3 degrees of the Scottish Rite system. There's still a couple of those that exist down in Louisiana area, but 99% of America goes off the York Rite first 3 degrees. So we have blue craft lodges. So within the fact of Shriners, for example, they were an order that was established a little later on. And originally its intention was to be kind of, I guess, a party zone, so to speak. You had to make it all the way through, not just your craft lodge, but the entire rite, either York Rite or Scottish Rite. And
Wow.
upon reaching that top position, you could then petition to become a Shriner. So what this was really targeted for was those elder gentlemen that, they were 80 plus years old. They'd served their entire life serving the craft of Freemasonry, and they're just kind of ready to put their feet up and have a little fun. So the shrine served that purpose. As time went and obviously membership numbers hit, they then adjusted that so that you just had to be a 3rd degree Master Mason and you could then join Shrine. As far as the other organizations, in that same manner, you have to be 3rd degree and then you could continue on to York Rite, Scottish Rite, or now Shrine. But because they're dependent upon craft lodges, they definitely feel the impact of membership probably more than us, because as we're feeling it, then they have to have our guys to then join theirs. So the less we have, the less they have.
And you need that much more time to be involved.
Exactly,
In stuff
precisely.
Like that.
And, we've had the issue, some jurisdictions really aim towards them. Many do not. Here in Kansas, we've luckily gotten away from them. The fact of 1-day classes, and that's just expediting one's degrees in a single day, usually in a large group setting. I'm personally not a fan of them at all because it robs the experience of that brother. But those type of programs were put in place to expedite the process just out of the need, the necessity of membership. Try to get those guys through as fast as possible so then they're eligible to join those other bodies. It's really kind of a disservice to the entire craft. We've ran the retention numbers, and honestly, it kind of works against us in more regards than anything. So there's really no reason to rob them of that experience and the teachings that they joined it for in the first place.
But are you also finding, for instance, with it, that, I mean, I understand that you have to present the work in different ways and that the whole experience has to be, you have to present it to every generation differently. I mean, have they looked at other ways as well as maybe is there such a thing as online meetings with Masons? Like, I know you usually meet in a lodge, but especially during this pandemic, I mean,
Yeah. So yeah, the COVID has been an interesting impact to Freemasonry, and it has opened the eyes of many jurisdictions. Obviously, here in the United States, we operate off jurisdictions. So pretty much every state has a jurisdiction. Counting in Prince Hall lodges, most states have 2 jurisdictions. But at that point, each state or each jurisdiction makes their own decisions within that. So in regards to video meetings, here in Kansas, we're not allowed to do them. What we are allowed to do is we can have a lodge meeting as far as fellowship and getting caught up on business and stuff like that, but we can't do any ritual. We can't hold official business and vote, stuff like that. But during the pandemic, other jurisdictions did make amendments for that. I believe Massachusetts was one where they didn't do a full ritual, but their Grand Lodge allowed for a very limited ritual and limited business to take place just out of sheer necessity. A lot of our lodges have to operate off of their bylaws. If they don't, they could get in trouble and get their charter revoked and all that. It's very set in stone, and those bylaws and stuff never took into account for something like COVID coming along. So I remember here in Kansas, when it first came along, we had Kansas lodges here really worried because you had to vote to pay the bills. So they're like, what do we do? How do we pay the light bill? We can't open lodge, we can't vote. So then you'd have to get special dispensation from the Grand Lodge, and if it's unprecedented time, so things that we've never had to do before, you have to start looking in those routes. But so in that mind frame, some jurisdictions did open up, at least to a degree, to be able to hold some online settings. Here in Kansas, not really, besides just getting together for fellowship. The only I guess, modernized online setting we have here in Kansas would be the Kansas Lodge of Research, which I'm a director of. When I took that over in 2018, we don't operate as a traditional lodge, so we don't have ritual. Our sole focus is Masonic education. So within that front, there was no protection measure that stopped us from meeting online, and we did take the Lodge of Research fully virtual. So once a month, we get on in Zoom like this with our entire membership and have speakers come on, which has been an amazing part because prior to this, to bring in a speaker would seriously mean booking a guy's flight, which could be $300 to $500 depending where it was. Bring him in, pay hotel, pay meals, all this, and being able to host a meeting over Zoom with your membership. First of all, we're a statewide organization, so getting guys to be able to travel into one location at a particular time is hard to do for local guys, let alone statewide. But then to have the option to bring everyone in that comfort and bring speakers in from across the country, even across the globe, in a friendly setting like this has really helped us excel to new levels. So it's been a really good thing for us in that venture.
Some good things have come out. That's good. Now, the Masonic education. So this basically you're the head of this research lodge. And what exactly is it just to deepen the experience and the education of Masons and in your different degrees and things?
Definitely. So, through the Masonic journey, the main thing we're charged with is to better ourselves as men through the pursuit of knowledge. So as we can learn these different aspects, then we can learn more about ourselves and grow better as a better person, essentially. So within the Lodge of Research, we definitely dive deeper into some of the factors that arise throughout the degrees to better understand those, talk through them, understand that as a group. But also a lot of different esoterics and occults that are not purely, Masonic in nature, understanding that Masonry is a mystery school and we have symbolism and stuff that's not, so to speak, owned by Freemasonry, but universal truths, I guess you could say. So in that fact, we delve into all those different points of deeper knowledge and discuss that through as a group to try to come back out and understand it better as a group and ultimately lead to a better understanding as a person and personal growth.
Well, I did want to ask you about that as well. Now, you said one of the
Sure.
goals of Freemasonry is to make good men better.
Definitely.
Now, I know some of the other organizations, Oddfellows and so on, and Elks are admitting women into their ranks. You ever see that happening with Freemasonry?
Oh, it already has.
I know like the Eastern Star has opened up, things like that.
Well, no, there's women Masonic lodges.
No way, really?
Yeah. So throughout history, we've seen our traditional male-only lodges, which I'm a member of. In smaller portions, we do have female-only lodges and mixed lodges, which admit male and female.
Oh.
Now, we do not recognize each other in the sense that we can't attend each other's meetings, we can't talk on the secrets of Masonry to one another, but we do exist. So those are options. Now, traditional male-only Masonry is the largest form of Masonry out there. So that's typically what you'll see throughout the United States and beyond. As far as, mixed and female only, it exists, but in limited areas. So it's a lot harder for those guys to, find access to those. I will preface that by saying there's some guys out there that will naysay me to death and roll over in their grave by me saying that they even exist. And I think that's rather unfortunate because, as we've harped on now, Freemasons are charged with being better people. And some guys get so caught up on Masons are male only and you don't exist. The simple fact is everyone can benefit from the teachings of Freemasonry. There's nothing within it that is male only, so to speak. We just particularly joined a group that we took an oath would be male only. And I think there is benefit to that. I think there's also benefit to those that wish to join a mixed lodge or wish to join a female only lodge if that's available to them in their particular area. To kind of bridge the question probably more to what you meant as far as our particular system admitting females, I don't see that happening in my lifetime, I don't think. It's possible, but there's multiple different levels to it. Is For one, we've made that oath at a constitutional level within Freemasonry that we will not admit women. Um, Within that, I think there is value to having a male only order, just
I
for some of
believe
the bonding aspect and so forth. But what I would like to see, just me personally, I can only speak for myself, what I would like to see is more access to all the bodies of Freemasonry, so that if you wanted to join a mixed lodge, or a female wanted to join a female only lodge, that's available to them if that's what's in their path. But yeah, I don't necessarily see us recognize each other in the fact of being able to visit each other's lodges, because ultimately that would kind of defeat the purpose.
Okay. Well, but for instance, you mentioned Prince Hall Freemasonry. Could you
Yeah.
visit a Prince Hall lodge?
Depends on your jurisdiction, but I'm proud to say in most locations now, yes.
Oh,
Here in Kansas, we have full dual recognition. So a Prince Hall Grand Lodge, like the one we have here in Kansas, is no different than visiting a lodge in Missouri. We view them as full brothers. They're welcome to come to our meetings. We're welcome to go to theirs. We just had our Grand Lodge annual communication this last week. Their Grand Master and their Grand Senior Warden sat on the East Dais with our Grand Master on the level. So that's very, very good to see. It wasn't always that way. And unfortunately, there's still some places in the U.S. that do not see that way and have not recognized Prince Hall Grand Lodge. And I think that's a tragedy to Masonry as a whole.
so, but you know, tell us a little bit about your podcast. I love interviewing other podcasters, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I started Historical Light back in 2016. So I joined Freemasonry in 2014. And I think for those first 2 years, I was really just trying to find myself. Freemasonry, there's a lot to soak in. It definitely altered my life as far as just kind of growing up and understanding things. So really looking for that path of where I can not just receive so much, but also give back in a manner.
I'm sorry,
Um,
was it in your family, by the way, Freemasonry?
Yeah, that's an odd story. So I'm actually a fifth generation Freemason,
Okay.
but I had no connection to it whatsoever until my father-in-law really connected the dot for me. So growing up, we'd always, go to the cemetery and stuff on Memorial Day, and I'd see the symbols and all the graves, and I'd ask my parents what it was, and I'd commonly get, "Oh, it's some cult your grandparents were a part of, or whatever." And I was young enough, I didn't know, I didn't care. So it just kind of got left at that. But when I started dating my now wife, and especially when we got married, her father, Angelo, was a very, very deep Freemason. He'd been in it for a long time, meant the world to him. And I could tell he wanted his son in law to be a Mason as well, to kind of carry on that tradition. So I heard about it just nonstop: Masonry, Masonry, Masonry. And at that point, from that outside perspective, to me, it was just a bunch of old guys, and I didn't see the appeal for someone like me to get involved in it. So I kind of blew him off and blew him off again, to the point that he actually stopped talking about it altogether. And it's one of those things, like, you've never seen a certain car before until you buy that car, and then it's everywhere. Everyone has that car. So he stopped talking about it, and then Masonry was everywhere. It was around the time that National Treasure came out.
Yeah.
I started seeing, it's one of those things, I guess I just never looked before. But you start seeing the symbols on cars. I started seeing people with T-shirts. We were in a grocery store one day, and it's such a weird thing. This guy walked through the grocery store in full Masonic regalia. Like, it doesn't even make sense to me to
Wow.
this day, but he did. And so things like this just started popping up everywhere. And it got me to a point, like, I don't like secrets. I have to know more. So I'd approach him, and then he didn't want to talk about it. So that drove me crazy. So then I was totally locked in, and eventually told him, basically, if you're not going to talk to me, I'm just going to join a lodge. And he's like, okay, let's do this the right way. So he got me in, and I never looked back. I joined Lenexa Lodge in 2014. We ended up moving out here to Gardner, so I transferred lodges. And it was when I moved to Gardner that Historical Light came about. So a lot of lodges in the United States have this like 1970s feel. As a part of time in the United States that many lodges were doing pretty decent, and they rebuilt buildings or converted buildings and so forth. So that's kind of where Masonry's stuck today. Um, and that's the feel I had from Lenexa Lodge. It was a very prominent lodge. Everyone was very, very well dressed, but I didn't get that feel of history because it was rather new in a sense. But when I came to Gardner Lodge, they were chartered in 1868. The particular building we're in now was built in 1907, and immediately walking in there, you just feel the history. But I noticed firsthand, one of the prominent things when you visit a Masonic lodge is they're very proud of past masters, guys that have served in the worshipful master's seat. And they'll often have pictures, plastered across the wall with all the past masters. Lenexa had that, quite a few of them. When I went to Gardner, 1868, that's over 150 years old, and they had like 10 guys and a bunch of blanks. And for a lodge that I could just feel such history in, that impacted me. And when I got talking to them, and they were like, yeah, we really don't know much of the history, we don't have those pictures, it just sparked something inside of me that I knew I can give back here. This is where I can get involved. And within that work, I became infatuated with Masonic history and ended up starting Historical Light, more as a learning process for myself, or kind of, I guess, a release of, all this that I was bringing in around Masonic history, and I wanted to share with people. So I brought on Historical Light and started interviewing guys from all over the United States, England, Canada, all over, and kind of a joint experience of learning Masonic history together. And it's been fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, like I said in my last segment, is when people ask me, some of the people I'm approaching for interviews have asked me what I'm trying to do here. One of the things I am trying to do is preserve the history of it, because it's more than just the Masons, the Pythians, the Oddfellows. They've played a big part in not just American and Canadian but world history. It's been a big part, and I think we really need to. I think we really do need to maintain and remember the history of it.
Oh, I fully agree. One thing I would love to see, not just Masonry, but kind of every fraternal order get back to, is that larger importance instilled in men. When we look back, and I speak for Masonry because that's what I'm most versed in, but I'm sure the same goes for all these other organizations as well. But when we look back to our early members, we have the early sheriffs, the early surgeons, the influential men that helped build society as we know it. Pretty much everywhere you look, you see a Mason involved in that. And like I said, I'm sure if you looked from a different lens, you might find those Pythians, those Oddfellows all involved in those as well. But I think these certain fraternal orders instill that need for meaning and to give back to society, whereas I think we've largely got away from that today. Obviously, we have many influential men within our societies, but I don't feel like we impact society as much as we did before. We try to do it all through charity now, which is kind of
or the
changed.
welfare state.
Yeah, but it's kind of changed Freemasonry's image and intention from what it was to something else, and really has lost focus on. I guess the best way you can put it is Masonry. People confuse it as it's supposed to be purely outward, when actually Masonry is selfish in the manner that it's purely inward. The intention of Masonry is me as the individual.
You better society by bettering yourself.
Exactly. It's supposed to happen as a natural byproduct. When you better yourself, you naturally better everything around you. But unfortunately, I think a lot of men just focus on bettering around them and forget about themselves. And I think that's a huge injustice to themselves and society around them because of how much more impact they could cause.
Hang on. Anyways, Mr. Powers, I appreciate your time here tonight, and you might want to go look around. Like you said, you had that storm down there, so I look forward to possibly having you back here on this podcast again.
Hey, it would be a pleasure anytime. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Thank you, sir. Good night. Well, how's that for our first guest? It was wonderful to have someone that knows so much about fraternalism here on Points of Light Radio. I do think it's important, as he seemed to remember the history of these storied organizations. To go forward, you need to take that retrospect, that look back at where these organizations have been. I do think if we don't remember the history, we will lose our way forward, as has happened with some other organizations, some of the other fraternal organizations within North America. I could, to name just a couple, I can remember the Ancient Order of United Workmen, or the Knights of the Maccabees, who contributed so much to people and to our society very early on, but then for whatever reason have faded out, right? So as I said, to see the way forward, we need to look back. It was wonderful having Mr. Powers here. I am going to, just a side note, enclose a link for this particular installment of Points of Light Radio. I'm going to enclose his link in the details section of this particular installment. And I also want to point out that Points of Light Radio is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify and my Spotify channel and my Points of Light store in the details section of this particular installment. And I also want to point out, I keep saying this, that I'm available to advertise for any store that carries fraternal merchandise here on Points of Light Radio. I welcome the opportunity to do that for you. But until we meet again, folks, just step into the light.